And so we come to 2006 to 2008, which is a period where I don't know many of Friedemann Friese's games. I'm not particularly familiar with them. One that I do have is Monstermaler, which was re-released later as a game called Tadam. It's a drawing game, sort of along the lines of Telestrations or Eat Poop You Cat, where you have these sheets of paper. The whole game is a pad of paper. It doesn't even come in a box, and all these names of different celebrities and historical figures on here, and you draw half of the picture, and then you fold it over and you pass it on to the person to the left, and then they draw the other half of the picture without looking at yours, and then the other players have to guess who it is that you've drawn. So it's a party game, a simple sort of party game. So that's Monstermaler, later released as Tadam with white clean boards and all that sort of stuff, upgraded components, I suppose. This was followed by a game called Formidable Foes. So Formidable Foes was Friedemann Friese's sort of attempt at a dungeon crawler. It's his lowest rated game on Board Game Geek, or one of the lowest rated, but it has fantastic components, again a fantastic artwork by Maura Kaluski. I haven't played it, so I can't say whether the ratings are justified or not. I suspect I would like it because I tend to like his bigger box games, but I'd certainly give it a go. This was followed by a couple of auction games. So there's Felix, the Cat in the Sack, and Fiji. Again, Friedemann Friese constantly revisiting old themes. So auctions like we see in the Friesematenten collectible card game, like we see in Funny Friends, and like we see in Power Grid, I suppose most notably. Auctions keep coming back. And then in 2008, we have Fast Flowing Forest Fellers. Now this one I have played, I haven't got it to show you. It's a large box game with lots of different boards to make up a racetrack, and it's these sort of lumberjacks riding on logs down a river using cards to move, and logs are going down with you and blocking the way of the other players. It's a straight race game, a sort of competitor to things like Formula D or Snowtails. You know, a straight, simple race game, lovely artwork, nice components, good, fun game, really good game. And then we move back onto some games which I am a little more familiar with. So let's talk about Three Commandments. So here is the Three Commandments, a co-authored game with Friedemann Friese, Fraser Lamont and Gordon Lamont. It's a party game, but a very odd party game. And let's have a look at how it works. So, in the Three Commandments, we have this board which represents a sort of religious ritual, I suppose. It's got this sort of symbol of a sort of religious icon in the middle of the table, and then one player will play the High Priestess, and the High Priestess will choose from these decks of cards here. They will choose cards which give various tasks which the other players can't see. Okay, and most of these tasks revolve around these wooden tokens on the board there, which are called artifacts. Now, the High Priestess will choose from a hand of 4 cards, 2 cards to go on this side of this marker here, which means these are positive things, and this is a taboo, okay? And the other players then each, in turn, move one of these tokens from one of these artifacts from one space to another somewhere on the board, and in doing so they may achieve a certain number of points or negative points based on what's over here, or they may score points by doing various things, like for example this one says if you use your left hand you're going to get 5 points, but for example this guy who's moved it, he's left a number of areas with at least 1 brown artifact, so there's 4 areas there, so he's lost 4 points there. If he'd used his left hand, which I believe I did, then he's gained 5 points, and then he's gaining points for the number of areas with at least 1 black artifact. So he's getting overall positive points. The players don't know what they're scoring the points for, so they're going to have to work that out by watching what each other does. But there are a number of very odd things that will come up. So if you speak with somebody who's not in the game, you score points. If you act macho while you're moving your thing, you gain points. If you touch another artifact, you gain points. If you put them touching each other, if you touch the board, if you make a sound different from speaking, if you stand up, if you change hands, if you surprise the High Priestess, if you don't use your thumb, if you move the artifact in circles, if you use your little finger, if you use both hands, if you call the High Priestess animals' names. Some of these will have you singing at the artifacts or running around or, doing all sorts of weird stuff. So the game gets you acting very oddly. It's a strange game design. It's a nice idea. I can't see myself ever getting this to the table. I have to admit I've not played it. I'm sure it could be a lot of fun, but I think you're really, really going to need the right group to play it. It feels to me like these cards, you really need to know all of these cards before you can play it with any degree of strategy. And without any degree of strategy, the game is just going to become a bit of a random sort of mess. But what do I know? As I say, I've not played the game. I think I'm glad I've got it in my collection. It's something very odd and very unique, and maybe the day will come where I'll have the right people to play this, but I think I'm some way off at the moment. So that's the Three Commandments, an odd party game with a little bit more thinking than your average party game, and another fairly eccentric design by Friedemann Friese. So we're now around 2009 and Friedemann Friese releases Power Grid Factory Manager. So I'll show you how Power Grid Factory Manager roughly works. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because it's not my favourite of the games. In fact, I consider this one really not to be very Friese-like at all. It doesn't feature many of his trademark elements. There's no stack building here, stack management here. There's no race mechanic. Now that really is unusual. We play through 5 rounds here and then the game is over. There's not very much interaction between the players, and there's very, very little randomness, even controlled randomness. Just a few tile draws. That's about it. What there is a lot of optimization, engine building, and a few auctions that work in different ways. So we've got a factory board. Each player has their own individual factory with a number of small tiles on them, just basic tiles to begin with, and then throughout the game tiles will be pulled off of this big board here and brought down into a central sort of auction area. I suppose in that way it's reminiscent of Power Grid, although that's one of the only ways in which it's reminiscent really. Players use their worker tokens to bid for player order. So these are the player order tokens, and then any remaining workers are used to bid, to select tiles, which they then bid with money to take these tiles and put them into their area. And these will have different types of robots and bits of equipment, which are going to create production and storage, and these things will then generate money, but they're also going to have requirements for energy and for workers, which is going to potentially cost money in terms of increasing the energy required by the factory, and that's going to have a cost associated with it as well at the end of each round. It's a fairly bare bones optimization exercise, very dry. The artwork, as always, Mauro Kaluski's artwork is fantastic, and that does something to lift the game off the table. But really, for me, this is a game for Friedemann Friese completists, or people who really are looking for a really sort of bare bones of an optimization game, because the elements that you find here you can find in a lot of other games with perhaps a bit more theme and sort of personality and innovation mixed in there. So for me, this is not Friedemann Friese's strongest game, although I know that it has plenty of people who like it very much, and it has very little to do with Power Grid. It's largely a promotional sort of reason that it's called Power Grid Factory Manager. although I'm sure there are thematic links and perhaps some mechanical links in there that Friedemann Friese is aware of. For me, those things don't necessarily come through. Around the same time that Friedemann Friese was working on Power Grid Factory Manager, he was also working on a game called Fauna, which is a trivia game all about animals and natural history. It's not a game that I've played. I'm not a big fan of trivia games, but it is very highly regarded, very well liked, and so that's one that's well worth a look if you have a family, I suppose, who likes trivia games. It's going to go down well in that sort of setting. (2010) was quite a year for Friedemann Friese. He produced these 5 games, all in 2010. Schwarzer Freitag is a particularly interesting thing. This is the first game of what was called the Friday Project. So the Friday Project was started in 2008, and Friedemann Friese said he was going to work on one game each Friday, only on a Friday, and he was going to continue to do that for 5 years and release the game in 2013 at Essen. Well, he actually found that after 2 years of doing that, he had a game ready, and it was this Black Friday game, Schwarzer Freitag, that we'll talk about. He then went on to release a further 3 games in that series before he finished that Friday project in 2013, and we'll come on to those other games as we continue to talk about this. I've talked about Black Friday or Schwarzer Freitag quite extensively in another video review, so I won't go into it in any great depth here. But for me, this is Friese's other serious game. Along with Power Grid, this is a meaty game. It's got a ton of strategy and tactical elements in it. The game has been practically killed off in its reputation because of its rulebook, which is among the worst rulebooks I've ever seen in a game. It's virtually impossible to learn how to play the game just from the rulebook. However, there are alternate rulebooks which have been put together and uploaded onto the Board Game Geek website, so it is possible to get a rulebook that works very well for this game, and when you do, it just becomes a fantastic stocks and shares game. I love stocks and shares games in general. This is one of the best. It's certainly the best stocks and shares game to play with 2 players, in my opinion. And the game is all based around a crashing market, a Wall Street sort of crashing market, where you know at some point everything's going to crash, and it's about pushing your luck, really. How long can I hang on before I get out and start buying the more stable silver and gold before I get out of the market? So it's a fantastic game, fantastic theme, works really well. Shame about that rule book, but this is a quality title and one that almost rivals Power Grid for me as one of his Friese's serious games. That said, it's not dry. It's a lot of fun because there's a lot of tension in this game and quite a lot of randomness, which all helps with that excitement too. So great game, Black Friday. Right at the start of this whistle-stop tour, I mentioned a collectible card game designed by Friedemann Friese called Friesematenten. I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong. I mentioned that it is a play on the word mean or nasty, but just with Friese squeezed in there. And it says here, you are not here to find friends. This is a small boxed card game. The sequel to it is Die Schatmanner, or I guess the Shadow People, or Shadowy Men, or something like that. And the 2 games combined give you all the cards that you could need for this game. A big deck of cards. You only use 15 of these per player during the game, so you only use a small deck each time, so every game is going to be different. And this game is pure Friedemann Friese. It has the stack management mechanic in there, which I've mentioned a few times. I haven't yet talked about how that works. It has a lot of auctions. It has a lot of very direct player interaction, a central economic engine, and it's a big chunk of controlled random elements in there as well. So this is very classic Friese. The cards have sort of fairly cynical, amusing artwork, again, this time not by Maura Kaluski, but by another one of their collaborators, Frédéric Bertrand. And you have these cards in different colours. These are going to be auctioned off, so at any one time there's going to be a marketplace, a bit like in Power Grid, and players are going to bid on these cards. in order to take them into their playing area in front of them. Your basic card is a factory. So factories are any sort of productive card. So this one being a cinema, it creates 10 euros every turn. So every turn this player is going to get 10 euros. It minimum bid 48 euros to pay for it, and it also gives 6 victory points at the end of the game. You then have the yellow cards, which are straight up victory points, 9 victory points here. Blue cards are influence cards, so they affect other cards. So this one doubles the victory points of one card in your collection. And then these are the nasty cards, the green ones, the action cards. This one being the Berserker. This lets you destroy any card and remove it from the game. That's not a subtle card, clearly. There are much more subtle ones than this that interact in all sorts of clever ways. But it's always about valuing up, how valuable is that to me? How important is it for me to prevent other players getting that and destroying the factories that I've got in front of me? The sequel, the Schatmanner, introduces these green cubes. So now we have factories that don't necessarily always produce money, although often they do. They also produce cubes. So each turn a cube will get placed on there, and every cube on this card is worth 5 victory points. But the card is destroyed as soon as there are 5 markers on it. So there's a timing element to this. Then other cards will come into play which allow you to move markers from one card to another. So these can be moved about, which is obviously going to keep this in play. And if these cubes are put onto green cards, it gives them multiple activations. Lots of clever stuff going on with these green cubes as well. So the stack management element of this is that as these are presented for auction, if they are not purchased, they then go into a discard pile, and the discard pile then goes back into the deck, and you go through the deck a second time. So the second time through the deck, all the more valuable cards that couldn't be bought at the beginning become available. So that gives you time to get your engine going before you start to buy the more productive things, and the game escalates in that sort of snowball effect that we see in a lot of Friese games. Now this is the exact same mechanic that we see in Power Grid. This is obviously a direct precursor to Power Grid, in that the more expensive power stations in Power Grid come out towards the end of the game, because at the early stages they're not bought and they're shuffled back into the deck. You see similar elements of this stack management in Famiglia, another card game which I'll talk about in a little while, Furstenfeld, which is sort of a reverse deck builder, and then Friese starts to move into more classic, well, I say classic, I suppose, the newer deck building of Dominion and the like in games like Copycat and Friday. So more sort of standard deck building starts to become an interest for him. But this game is really what Friese is all about. It's an obscure game. It's only available in German, but it's a very good, very entertaining game with quite a lot of meat on it for a simple card game. If you can do away with the paper money, all the better. Works well with poker chips and that sort of thing. One thing to mention about this game is it does have a lot of German text on it. So these are all paste-ups that I've done here. The paste-ups are all available on Board Game Geek, so they're not hard to come by, but it is a bit of work, printing them off, cutting them all out and sticking them on the cards. But the game works very well once you've done that. Stich-Meister, or Trick-Master, is another small box card game from Friedemann Friese, available only in German, and it does require some paste-ups to get this working, but again, those paste-ups are available on the Board Game Geek website, so it's not too tricky. This is a trick-taking game. At its simplest, this is standard sort of stuff. You have a hand of cards, somebody leads with a particular card. Now, so this one is in the suit of gates. Everybody must now follow with gates, but if they don't have any gates, they can follow with something else, and then trumps will be introduced. So it works very much like a simple trick-taking game. Just players play them, and then somebody will win the trick. They'll take that, and that will score them 1 point, and they count up how many tricks they've won at the end of the game. So that is the basics of Stich-Meister. But what sets it apart from any other trick-taking game is these cards here. So every player will have 3 cards at the beginning of the game, and they all talk about different types of rules. So these are trumps, so this means 9s would be trumps or 5s would be trumps, and then some of them have text on which changes the rules. So this one says the lead suit is not higher than other suits played to a trick, but trumps remain in force. a trump suit continues to be higher than all other suits. So it means that the person who's leading that suit is not higher than anything else. The wording is sometimes hard to get your head around, and particularly when you get a couple that contradict each other or sort of sit uncomfortably together. But that's the fun of the game, really, that you'll always have 4 of these cards, because each player will choose one. So you'll end up with 4 cards in play. And they'll interact in different ways. So every game is different, and it creates lots of crazy variations on the trick-taking theme. It's not a game that is absolutely full of strategy. A lot of these situations are fairly random, but it is fun, and it is wacky. You know, it's just an odd way of playing a card game. A lot of fun though. I think this is a good game, well worth picking up. I'm going to mention at this point a much later release, which is this one, Funf Gurken, which came out in 2013 at Essen. Again, a small box game. This time it's called Ein Spielerempfehlung von Friedemann Friese. It's not his own design. This is a classic public domain card game, Cucumber, but it's been reboxed and presented by Friedemann Friese. So we have a deck of cards with all these cucumbers on them, and then we have a bunch of nice cucumber pieces, wooden cucumber pieces, which are nice and quirky. So each player will have a hand of 7 cards, and then it's a simple trick-taking game. You play the card, there's no suits here, so you just play a card, each other player will then play a card until eventually somebody wins it, they take that trick. Now, the only trick that actually scores anybody any points is the 7th trick. So the final card in your hand is the one that we need to be worrying about, and you're constantly manoeuvring yourself so that you're not going to win that trick. You do not want to be the one that wins the 7th trick. So if the person who wins the 7th trick wins it with a 12, then they're going to take 4 cucumbers, and having cucumbers is bad, because if you have 5 of them, you're eliminated from the game. So players are gradually eliminated until there's 2 people left, and then they play off against each other. It's not a game that is full of strategy, again, a bit like Stich-Meister, perhaps even less strategy involved than Stich-Meister, but it does create some decisions, and it is a lot of fun. It's very, very easy to pick up and explain the rules. I think it's a quality little card game, good for family play and that sort of thing. Yeah, and lovely, amusing cucumber gherkin related artwork, which is always unique and nice and green, of course. Once again, not sure how to pronounce this one, but Famiglia I'll go with. So this is a 2-player card game, a very good 2-player card game with some slightly unusual mechanics in it and some fantastic artwork by Maurer, Kaluski and Frederick Bertrand. So in this game, each player will have a starting hand of 4 zeros of different suits, essentially. So these guys are sort of the mafia bosses, the red ones. Then we've got the accountants, we've got these mercenaries, and then thugs. Okay, and they all sort of work in slightly different ways, but the basis of the game is that there is a central market of 6 cards at the beginning, and players can take cards from this market, but only by playing 2 cards of the same colour. And if you're going to take a 1, you need to have 2 zeros in order to take a 1. Or if you're going to take a 3, you'd need to have 2 2s in that colour. So 2 red 2s in order to take that red 3. Now, if there are no zeros in the market, like there are here, then what you can do is take away a higher number. So take away, say, this number 4, and then deal out 4 new cards into the market, so that the market keeps refreshing and more options become available to you, and you can keep doing that. These then go back into the deck, so the more valuable cards are going to be shuffled under in that stack management sort of way that we talked about with Friesematenten. So that will go back under the deck, and we go through the deck a couple of times. Now, the cards will do different things. The easiest ones are the mafia bosses. These do nothing, but they're worth more victory points at the end of the game than all the others. You can see he's worth 1, everybody else is worth 0 on the zeros. But also up here, the number 3 here is worth 10, whereas a number 3 of yellow is only worth 6. Then you have the blue guys. The blue guys will let you place them on the table, and then you can swap out somebody that you've already played back into your hand. So they're calling people back into play. The mercenaries, well, they will act as a player of another colour. So they're going to act as a mafia boss, or act as an accountant, or act as a thug, but at a reduced level. So the 0 can't go reduced, but say we had a 2, a mercenary, he can act as a 1 or a 0 of another colour. And then you have the thugs. Now these guys are going to scare people, so they're going to reduce their value. So if I played him, I can reduce anyone on the table's value by up to 3. So I could reduce him down to a 0, for example, and then take him into my hand. So they all have different ways that they work, and you gradually build up the pile of cards in front of you. There's not a lot of direct player interaction, apart from depriving people of the cards that they want by taking them first. But it's a straight up, fairly, well, cleverly designed, fairly serious 2-player competitive card game. Theme doesn't really come through, but this fantastic artwork does lift it from just being a deck of playing cards. And these special powers also feel thematic to a degree. It's a lovely production, nice cards, nice shape of cards, although they're hard to sleeve because they're such an odd sort of shape. But a good small box game. This one is available in English, and there's even a solitaire version which you can download with a robot player, similar to those robot players that we've seen in Fearsome Floors and in the robots for Power Grid. So great game, Famiglia, well worth looking at. Furstenfeld is another economic title by Friedemann Friese with a central market, almost similar to the Power Grid market, really. These will cost different prices. As these resources are taken off the board, the prices will change. There are different things which alter the prices down here throughout the game, and then we have a big pile of resources and money down here. Each individual player has their own player board and their own deck of cards, similar to in a deck building game. So they have a deck which they start the game with, and on each turn they're going to draw cards from that deck, and then they generate resources with the spaces. So initially they'll generate 1 water, 1 wheat, and some hops on there. What we're doing in this game is building, dealing with breweries and producing beer, and then building our little area of land around here with various different buildings. So a player will produce these goods. They may then sell these goods to the various different markets for different prices. That money, that income will give them the opportunity to build things. As with any deck builder, initially you're building stuff to increase your engine, so you're going to be placing stuff onto the board, which either increases your production. For example, this now produces 3 water, or you're just filling up spaces. And then eventually, later in the game, you're going to be putting down things which are purely there for victory points, and in the advanced game these need to go in a certain order. So we need to put the number 1 palace on here, number 2 palace, number 3 palace, and then 4 and 5, and that limits, of course, which other buildings you're building over the top of. So what we're actually doing throughout the game is reducing the size of the deck. So on our turn we'll usually have a hand of 4 cards. We might play 1 or 2 of them, or perhaps we'll just play 1 of them, and then we'll discard all except for 1. So 1 will stay in our hand, the other 2 get placed under the deck. So again, we have that stack management aspect where the more valuable cards, which you can't afford at the beginning of the game, will come back to you later, albeit in your own individual deck, unlike the sort of shared decks that you see in those other stack management games. So this is quite a light game. There's not a huge amount to it. It comes with a basic variant, which I don't think I would particularly bother with. I think the strategy of the more advanced variant is perfectly accessible and makes for a very satisfying game. So that's Furstenfeld, a nice production, nice components, nice square sort of Power Grid type cards, and nice wooden bits. So yeah, it's a decent economic game. nothing mind-blowing, but it is different, and it's always nice when Friedemann Friese is experimenting with different ideas, different formats and different genres, and this is a good example of that.